in the Bible, 1 Timothy chapter 4 verse 2, it talks about hypocritical liars whose conscience has been seared as if by a hot iron. We've had a couple of high profile cases recently. First of all, there was the chief medical officer in Scotland who was telling people to stay at home, standing there publicly, addressing the cameras, and yet all the while she was visiting a second home, which was almost a round trip of 100 miles away, telling people to do one thing, but actually doing another yourself. And then we had a professor in England, or UK of course, again telling people stay at home, and then all the while he was going off and seeing a married person. He was having a relationship with someone else. Catherine Calderwood and Neil Ferguson, names that are probably familiar to us. So that's what we think of when we think of people being hypocrites, saying one thing but actually doing something else themselves. I had to look at The Guardian, an old article, and it was the 10 most political hypocrites at that time. And I thought this will be interesting. I bet they're all 10 conservatives. As it happened, there were 3 conservatives. Jonathan Aiken, remember him with the sword of truth? Well, he's now an ordained minister, so he's certainly turned his life around. And then there was John Major, David Cameron, but the other 7 were Labour politicians. One of them was Diane Abbott, who was telling people that you should not send your children to private school, and yet at the same time her son was in a private school. And for me, it's not so much, well, take the private school for example. I don't have a problem with people that pay for their children to go to private schools, but if you're then telling people that they shouldn't, but you do it yourselves, that's what we think of when we think of the term hypocrite. It's not so much having an opinion or a strong view even, but it's telling others that they can't do something, but you're doing it yourself. So we look at these things in life, these people, these situations, these circumstances. But for me, again, it's not just about people doing wrong as such, because if we all look at ourselves, that's me and you, then of course we all fall short of perfection. So none of us can point the finger. And this message that I'm bringing today isn't about pointing the finger at anyone. It's just purely and simply highlighting what an hypocrite is. We're telling people to do one thing, and yet we're doing something else ourselves. Don't worry about what happens in Scotland or in England or the political realm. Worry about ourselves. Think about our own life. Examine our own hearts. Are we in that position? Perhaps we're not even aware until we start to think that yes, we are. We're always telling someone about this, but actually we're doing it ourselves. It's good to examine our own hearts. It talks in that verse that I referred to, not just about the hypocritical liars, that's a strong term, but it also talks about a conscience. Conscience is a good thing. It's our conscience that keeps us on the right track. It's that inner voice, the voice of our spirit that tells us that's wrong, don't do that. But it's possible to have a seared conscience. In other words, a conscience that has been seared as with a hot iron. It's been made ineffective. So people then behave without the caution and the check of a conscience in their lives. A conscience is a good thing. If you know the story Pinocchio, you know that Jiminy Cricket was Pinocchio's conscience. A conscience is a very admirable state to be in. It's something that's worthwhile to seek after, to have a state of being aware of a conscience is a good place to be in. Hypocritical liars, we don't want to dwell on all that. It's not about pointing the finger at people. It's not about gloating over the misfortunes of others, but rather it's actually about looking at ourselves, examining our own hearts. Are we, never mind anyone else, are we hypocritical liars? Have our consciences been seared as with a hot iron? Develop a conscience. Don't be a hypocrite. Don't be a liar. The two together is a dangerous formula. But seek to do the right thing. Seek to live a life of truth, of justice, of righteousness.